Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game, and you're listening to PTCG Radio. Now, the first thing you may notice this week is that we're going out a day early. Now, you might not notice, some of you might only look for it on a Wednesday, but if you are hearing this on a Tuesday, you're welcome. Long story short, I'm going on a school trip tomorrow, running the trip. I am just about old enough now, and that means that I'm going to get back late tomorrow, and rather than putting out a late podcast after a long day at Harry Potter World, yeah, I'm not a big fan. But some people are, and that's cool. But, you know, might be fun. I'm going to record it tonight and pop it out tonight instead. So those people that asked me to pop it out early, you got your wish. Yay, etc. Also, a big thank you to those people who have given me feedback on the audio quality from the last few weeks. Apparently it is much, much better. People are telling me that it has been successful, and I very much appreciate the feedback on that. So thank you to everyone who's been helping me out with that. Now, in terms of news this week, we don't have very much in terms of new news, in terms of exciting new news. But one thing which I think you guys should be excited about and might want to know about, especially if you're listening to this podcast, is that this coming weekend, this is February the 14th and 15th, Pokémon, TCPI, the Pokémon Company International, are going to stream St. Louis Regional. They're actually going to stream the official Pokémon are going to stream it, not some fan stream. Now, what this does mean is, inevitably, there's going to be a huge amount of dead air in there, like we see at Nationals and Worlds, but it also means we're going to have a very good quality stream. They're going to be popping them in sleeves that don't reflect glare, and it's just going to be all around much easier to actually to watch it and make sense of it. I think they've got Karl Sukovic and Josh Whittenkeller, I believe, to commentate again. So they've got, a good commentary team, and, it's all looking pretty gosh darn nice, to be honest, with you. So the best way to go about it, to be honest, if you go on pokerbeach.com, they are going to post a link up to the stream. Or if you go to twitch.tv and find the official Pokemon channel, it will be streamed on there as well. They're the two best places to go if you're looking for that stream. Now, it's going to be fairly late at night. It's going to be awkward timing if you're in the UK or Europe, as a lot of my listeners I know are. But, if you've got nothing else on, give it a go. I certainly will be watching it if I'm not fast asleep, although that is somewhat of a big if, because I'll be down with my girlfriend, and she likes to sleep. So that's really it in terms of news this week. What we're going to do is we're going to go through just the top 4 of the ECC. Now, I haven't been able to get a deck-by-deck breakdown of all the top 32 at the ECC. And similarly, I've got a couple of interviews lined up, one with a top 32 competitor and one with a top 4 competitor. And they are going to be coming either next week, although I'm on half-term, so it might be awkward to set up, but definitely the week after. We're going to have a couple interviews from people who played at the ECC and played very well and did very well at the ECC. And if I can find a complete list of top 32 decks, we're going to go through that in more detail, like I say, next week or the week after. For now, we're going to be focusing entirely on the top 4, and I am delighted to say that 2 people who are in the top 4 are UK competitors. Now, I suppose if we're splitting hairs, in reality, one of them, Emmanuel de Silva, is in fact Dutch, but he basically lives in the UK now, goes and wins all of our UK tournaments, and I believe is going to be eligible for UK Nationals this year, where he will inevitably top cut and go deep into it, if not win it. So I'm counting him as British, quite frankly. Plus, he's a lovely chap, so, it's all good. So starting off with the top 4, we had Luke Kirkham, good friend of mine, a chap who's been on the podcast before, the one who runs the blog victory-road.co that I've told you about on a number of occasions. He played Seismitoad. Now, unfortunately, when you got to the top 4, as we're going to see, 2 of the decks were Virizion Genesect, and Seismitoad is not great for Virizion Genesect. Against Virizion Genesect, I should say. It's brilliant if you are Virizion Genesect. But, he got all the way to top 4. He managed to get through. Now, the way the ECC works, you're talking about 300 people beginning. Those 300 people play, I think, 9 rounds, and at the end of the 9 rounds, the top 32 players go through to day 2. When you get to day 2, you have a further 5 rounds, at which point the top 8 players overall, taking your cumulative record from the 2 days, go into the top 8 and play just an ordinary top 8 single elimination cut. Now, Luke managed to scrape in at 8th place after day 2 with a little bit of resistance on his side just showing that he'd beaten good players and done well throughout the day, the 2 days I should say. And he ended up against the top seed, a Donphan player with Seismitoad. Now, I've made it very clear in the past that initially I would have given the matchup, if you had two equally skilled players, I would have given the matchup to Seismitoad. But since the newer sets have come out, I really think it has flicked into Donphan's favour. The other thing you should, of course, be realising at this stage is that if Luke was the 8th seed, then when he gets to Top Cut, when he gets to the top 8, he is in fact playing the number 1 seed. So not only is he playing Donphan, which I consider to be a fairly dismal matchup for Seismitoad, certainly not one of the best ones, he's playing against the number 1 seed, the person who over the preceding 2 days had actually managed to get a better record than anybody else at the entire tournament. And he managed to win. And then he got on to top 4 where he faced a Virizion Genesect, and as these things go, it is unfortunately far from ideal. But still, huge congratulations to Luke. Now, what he played was a Seismitoad list with Mewtwo, Manectric and Garbodor. Now, we're going to get him on next week or the week after to talk about his list in a bit more detail. But he's playing Lightning Energy, so essentially that makes the Evil Town matchup quite nice. You've got Manectric and you've got Lightning Energy, so your Evil Town matchup's quite nice. Even if they don't go and put tools on their Evil Town, so your attack only does 60, not 120, you can go and put a Head Ringer on it instead, and then you can hit for 120. Against an Evil Town EX, and obviously you're hitting for weakness, so that goes up to 240. It makes the Evil Town matchup very nice indeed. In terms of the mirror for Seismitoad, Luke's just a good player, and I've spoken to him about the mirror before, and I can tell you he's got this sussed. Virizion Genesect is a bad matchup, but it's winnable. You've got the Mewtwo, you've got the Manectric, so if you just go aggro with Mewtwo or Manectric with Muscle Bands, you can 2-hit KO the Virizion, and you can basically have a war of attrition and hope. You know, if you start off quite well and your opponent doesn't have a blistering start, it is a winnable match. And Luke's been playing this for a couple of tournaments now, and he has had some success against Virizion Genesect, although obviously an unfavourable matchup. Donphan, again, is not a particularly favourable matchup, but having said that, by the time you build in all of your Lysandras, etc., and the fact that he beat it in top 8, the number 1 seed, clearly he's got that matchup worked out. And although I give the matchup to Donphan with equally skilled players, I really do believe it's quite a close matchup. The Robo substitutes are a pain, but Seismitoad gets rid of that. With a Muscle Band, Verbank, Laser, Lysandra, and yes, I know that's a heck of a combo, you can Lysandra up and one-hit KO a Donphan. And, Horlicher can be a pain, but having said that, Muscle Band, Laser, Verbank, you're one-hit KOing the Horlicher anyway, and they're two-hit KOing you at best. So, if you're one-hit KOing the Horlicher and they're two-hit KOing you, that's not the end of the world, because you've obviously got the option to Max Potion or Switch or whatever. If you come against Pyroar, that's a much, much easier matchup, because he's playing Garbodor. If you come against the Aromatisse, again, if you get the Garbodor out, becomes a much, much easier matchup. And the biggest deck around at the moment really is Evil Tal. So when you factor in the fact that he was a good player and knew how the mirror worked, along with the fact that he played Manectric to take down Evil Tal in the mirror, I think that explains how he got to top 4. Now, the second place deck was Emmanuel de Silva, and this was an incredibly interesting deck, although apparently it's Alex Dow who actually came up with this particular combo, so I believe we need to give Alex Dow a little bit of a shout out. He's a good chap. He's got his Worlds invite already. Should point out that Luke Kirkham did get his Worlds invite with his top 4 finish at the ECC this past weekend. I know a lot of you were asking if I was going. My apologies for that. Essentially, life got in the way. I was at work on Friday and at work on Monday, and this particular year, it was a little bit too much. I am, as always, hoping to go back next year. I'm not expecting, never to go to the ECC again. I'm hoping to be back next year and see all you lovely people out there. Now, Alex Dow, he came up with this combo, and the combo is very, very simple. Jamming Net plus Hard Charm. Jamming Net is a Team Flare tool that makes your opponent do 20 less damage to the active. And Hard Charm is a tool that you put on your active so that your opponent's active does 20 less damage to you. You add them both up and your opponent is actually doing 40 less damage to you per turn. But of course that's not actually the whole story, because if you've got a Jamming Net on your opponent's active Pokemon, it means they don't have a Muscle Band on. So let's take Landorus, for instance. Landorus would be doing 30. You put the jamming net on, he does 10. You put the hard charm on, he does nothing. And, of course, he can't put a muscle band on. So if you get a Landorus with a strong energy and a fighting stadium, what would be doing, with a muscle band and a strong energy and a fighting stadium, he would actually be doing 90, even with a fighting energy, a strong energy and a fighting stadium. There's no muscle band, so he's only doing 70. And then you build in the rest of the combo, he's doing 30 damage with the stadium and the strong energy. And, of course, he's not always going to be able to have that. And that keeps you alive quite nicely. Now, the other thing which was slightly unusual about this deck is that it was a mono fairy deck. It played Florges EX. And that has an attack. It's got an attack that lets you get a supporter card, which is, for a fairy energy, which is useful if you have a slow start. And I'm sure it got used once or twice throughout a very long tournament. But generally, it's used for Bright Garden. This attack does 20 damage times the number of grass Pokemon and fairy Pokemon that you have in play. This is another reason to play a mono fairy deck. Now, in theory, you're probably going to have 6 Pokemon in play. They're all going to be fairy Pokemon. You're doing 120 damage. Put a muscle band on, you're doing 140, except we know you're not doing 140 because the whole point of the deck is you're playing Hard Charm. But that's basically just saying, you know what, I'm going to 2-hit KO you. And I'm fine with 2-hit KOing you, because you're doing naff all damage to me. Also played with Xerneas EX, has got a couple of useful attacks, and regular Xerneas, just to get energy on the board and help you set up, as long as the Aromatisse to move the energy around, and of course Max Potion. It's a very straightforward deck. You attack with Xerneas at the beginning of the game to help you set up. You then attack with, Xerneas if you're playing against a Safeguard Pokemon. Otherwise, it's Florges or Xerneas EX, whatever you want. You use a combination of Jamming Net and Hard Charm to stop them getting any real KOs on you, let alone one-hit KOs. And when you're getting down their damage that much, along with playing Max Potion to heal off the damage, it makes it very, very difficult for them to get any prizes whatsoever. Of course, you're slightly vulnerable to Garbodor, which is always a little bit of a pain. And you are potentially, if any metal decks are around, they're going to run through you. But rethink about it. Who's playing metal at the moment? Obviously, if you were to come against a Bronzong deck, they're going to be one-hitting all of your Pokemon quite easily. But there's so few metal decks around that I think you're going to be fairly safe with that. Going back to the previous Seismitoad discussion, of course, Seismitoad, pretty gosh darn good, to be honest, against the metal decks, because as soon as you get the trainer lock and the ability lock, the metal decks really don't do very much. Even when they start relying on double colourless energy to get going, you can just hammer them off with Enhanced Hammer quite easily. So going back to this mono fairy deck, it really is as simple as that. It's a combination of Aromatisse and Max Potion to heal, and a combination of Jamming Net and Hard Charm to stop them doing much damage at all. And then you got Florges and Xerneas EX, which are there as your attackers. Xerneas, if you're wondering, for free energy, a fairy double colourless does 60 and 30 to one of your opponents benched, and for 4 energy does 140, and you cannot use that attack next turn. But like I've said, you're not really going... Now, what you can do here is, get off 2 X-Blasts in a row with a Lysandre in the middle, so you do 140 to the active, 30 to the bench, then you Lysandre up the one with 30 on reverse it, and you've essentially done 170 to 2 different Pokemon. But that's not really, from what I understand, it's not really the point of the deck. The point of the deck is really just to try and make sure that your opponent isn't doing very much damage to you. And then Max Potioning it off. And then, both Florges and Xerneas are going to be easily 2-hit KOing. Xerneas' first attack does 60, Florges is probably doing 120, and for only 2 energy, remember, which is pretty good. And if you're basically 1-hit KOing non-EXs and 2-hit KOing EXs, while your opponent's struggling to take any KOs off you at all, this is going to be, it's going to be pretty nice. Now, what I really like about the ECC this year is if we look at the top 4, we've got surprises. The Seismitoad, slightly unusual list with Garbodor and Manectric and Mewtwo, more of a kind of Seismitoad toolbox list. but fairly standard. But in the second place list, this Mono Fairy, I mean, did anyone really think that a Mono Fairy with just Fjord and Xerneas EX was going to get second at the biggest European tournament in Europe this year? You know, he wants 7-1-1 in Swiss, then 3-0-2 in day 2, probably with some intentional draws there, which are legal. And then he beat Virgen in top 4 and Virgen Crobat also in top 8, and then Virgen Crobat in top 4. So going through the whole day, he's essentially going through 15 rounds with 3 draws and a loss and 11 wins. 12 wins. In 16 rounds, I should say. 16 rounds, 12 wins, 3 draws and a loss. That's crazy. That is an almost unheard of record. It's amazing. He wasn't the top seed somehow, the Donphan player was, but even so, that's just fantastic. So, what happened was, in the final, he actually got 2-0'd. And he got 2-0'd by a Virgin Crobat, and he got KO'd, apparently he got 2-0'd, and he attributes this slightly to Tool Retriever, which makes perfect sense. Now, if you look at Virizion Genesect against this, if you look at Virizion Genesect against this Fairy deck, you know, let's say for argument's sake you've got a Virizion. Now, Virizion's doing 70. You put a Jamming Net on there, it goes down to 50. You put a Hardsham on there, it goes down to 30. If you can get a Jamming Net on the on the Genesect as well, then the Genesect goes down to 80 damage, and you can see there, you know, even with 2 Emerald Slashes and a hit from Genesect, that's only 140. That's not killing you. Not only that, but then you've got Max Potions. So you can see how this has a very good Virizion Genesect matchup. That's pretty gosh darn nice. So, quite frankly, we like this. This is pretty good. Now, what I will say is just, you know, the Tool Retriever here is apparently, that's what a manual puts down as a swinging thing here. Now, it was Nicholas Lenhart Rappel, my apologies for the pronunciation of that name, a German chap who got first place at the ECC, and apparently, I didn't notice this, but the ECC is becoming real Germany-focused. German players tend to win year after year, and we saw this last year with Mark Lutz going on to win with a very straight, consistent Virizion Genesect list. So he only played 1 Tool Retriever, but that's kind of all you need, because you get rid of, you know, either you get rid of the Jamming Net on the Virizion to start hitting early, or what you can also do, of course, is get rid of the Jamming Net on Genesect, then you get your G-Booster out. It doesn't really matter if you're doing much damage with Genesect. The big problem with all of these energy-keeping decks has always been if you get all your energy knocked off. You know, this was the same with Kling Clang back in the day. You know, these ones which rely on getting energy on the board and keeping it there, your worst nightmare is getting all your energy knocked off. And that's what Virizion Genesect can do if they get the opportunity to get going on this. So essentially, what they do is they Tool Retriever off the Jamming Net, stick your G-Booster on, KO your Pokemon with all the energy, and you don't really need Virizion to be doing any damage. You can let Virizion get Jamming Netted, because all you really need Virizion for is getting energy on the field. When you've got enough energy on the field, then you can go ahead and get your Genesect up, get the G-Booster on using Tool Retriever G-Booster, and then you can just go straight ahead, get a KO, maybe even 2, in a row, and then that really is game. And essentially, that's how Tool Retriever made it from an unfavourable matchup for Virizion to a favourable. If this straight Fairy deck plays Virizion Genesect in a straightforward match without Tool Retriever, essentially as soon as they get the Jamming Net onto Genesect, they can't do enough damage to KO you, and you've got Max Potion and you win. With the Tool Retriever, however, they're then able to take all of the damage. They're able to take the Jamming Nets off with Tool Retriever, get the G-Booster on, 1-hit KO, take your energy off the board, and that has always been the thing which defeats these energy-saving decks. Now, the unusual thing about these decks, both the Virizion Genesect that made it into top 4, the other one was David Hockman, who has played in the UK a few times. Lovely chap. I've had the pleasure of playing myself on a couple of occasions. Played him at the ECC last year, in fact, twice. He got third with Virizion Crobat. Virizion Genesect Crobat. Whereas the other finalist, the actual winner, Nicholas, he only played Crobat, not Golbat. Now, the reason for these Pokemon, I haven't spoken to the German chaps, but I'm going to make a guess at what they're useful for. Now, if you've forgotten, and I did do what I consider to be quite a good video about this when I did my top cards of Phantom Forces, and I will be doing a Primal Clash video in the near future as well for this. But these are Pokemon which basically, they have fun little abilities which drop damage counters. So Crobat, when you evolve, you get to put 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. It has 3 retreats, and it has an attack for 1 energy which does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That's quite nice snipe. So 3 damage counters from nowhere when you evolve him, and you get to snipe for 30. Golbat, when you evolve, does 2 damage counters, and it's got an attack for 1 colourless energy that does 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon, benched and active. And essentially, and it's also got free retreats. So you've got the nice little bonus here that you've got a free retreater to go into, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, this makes the maths work in your favour. One of the downsides of Virizion Genesect has always been running out of energy or having a slow start. Now, you could use Golbat and Crobat as emergency attackers when you haven't got enough energy on the field, but really, they're there to, make sure you're not overly reliant on G-Booster and getting rid of all of your energies. It's far better if you can attack for 120 with a Muscle Band and 20 to the bench with Megalo Cannon rather than doing 200 with G-Booster and discarding 2 energies. The problem is, doing 120 itself isn't good enough. But if you can do 120 and then do, say, let's say 20 or 30 with Golbat or Crobat, then you can use Red Signal to drag something else active and just do 20 to the bench with Megalo Cannon and get the KO that way. So essentially, if you are able to hit a Pokemon on the bench and when it's active with the Genesect with a Muscle Band, you're doing 140. You need 30 or 40 extra damage in order to get the KO there, and that's where Golbat and Crobat come in. Golbat does 2 extra damage counters, Crobat does 3, and also you've got those sniping attacks, 30 with the Crobat and 20 with the Golbat. And what this basically does, like I've said, it allows you to swing the maths in your favour so you can get the KOs without having to be overly reliant on G-Booster, and that is a huge advantage. Now, you obviously play the G-Booster as well, but it gives you these options that a lot of decks don't have. Now, the other thing here is, a lot of people might be thinking, well, how do you fit the Golbat and Crobat in? But the thing which I've made this point on the podcast many times before, Virizion Genesect has always been one of those decks that has space in, where you can justify putting extra cards in there. There's always been a little bit of spare space. And it only takes a 1-1 line or a 1-1-1 line to actually go about getting this stuff in there. Now, David Hockman hasn't put his list up, although he does play at least 1 Crobat, 1 Golbat. But Nicholas has, and if you look at his list, he's got a single Zubat and a single Crobat. A single Golbat. The other thing I should point out is that Zubat can snipe for 10 for a single energy. Which, again, it's not amazing, but every little helps. All of this can potentially be useful in the future. So, an interesting take on Virizion Genesect, and as it managed to take first and third place at the biggest tournament in Europe, I think we can say with some certainty that it worked. And it seems to be, from the vibe I'm getting on the internet, it seems to be that people are going to adopt this and play this kind of stuff in the future going forward, and why not? Let's say for argument's sake your opponent's got a 60 HP Pokemon on the bench, maybe a Drillbur or even their own Zubat or something along those lines. You evolve to Crobat and do 30, you then snipe for 30, you've got the one-hit KO very easily. You could use this for a Spritzy, for instance, if you're playing against an Aromatisse deck. So, it's far from ideal. Let's not forget, of course, that many, many people play Jirachi in their decks nowadays, and that only has 90 HP and gives up 2 prizes. So, if you evolve to Crobat and then snipe it for 30, it's only going to take another snipe for 30, and you get 2 prizes out of that in 2 turns, with a stage 2 that's only attacking for 1 energy. it's a useful little thing. Whether it's going to work in the future when people are wise to it, I don't know, but essentially all it does is it's your traditional Virizion Genesect list. They're just giving themselves some options by having these Crobats and these Golbats going. So since that took pretty much exactly 25 minutes, I hope you can see why I chose to focus on the top 4 rather than just going through the whole ECC in general. Like I say, I am hoping to have interviews with Luke Kirkham and my good friend Nicholas Pearce, who made top 32 also with Seismitoad Garbodor, in the coming either next week or maybe the week after if I'm struggling for time. But I'm looking forward to that. It should be quite good. And then we'll go through the top 32 if somebody's managed to get the decks, hopefully in the near future. But the fact that we had such interesting decks, I think, it bore talking about. I think it was a good idea to kind of go through this. So, the other thing I want to talk about today is City Championship results. Now, thank you very much to all the people who have sent me UK Championship results, City Championship results. Many people have, and it's been incredibly enlightening. But I'm not going to focus too much on the UK results now. Maybe in a future podcast I'll bring them all together and give you a little bit of a rundown on the table. But honestly, the UK results aren't showing us anything particularly exciting or unusual. So I'm going to go from a list which I found it on the charizardlounge.com, which is a website with which I was previously unfamiliar. I can't vouch for the website as a whole. It looks pretty good from the brief look I've had. But what they have done is they've gone on Verbank City, the Facebook group, and they've totaled up the City Championship results. Now, I cannot vouch for their information. I'm taking it wholesale off their website, but it seems fairly legit, and I've had a quick look through the threads on Verbank City, and it looks to have been done very well indeed. So thank you to those chaps. I am using their information. What I have done, however, is I've changed things just a little bit. I've told you before, now when it comes to regionals, I do my own lists because I like to split the decks up in my own way and I like to make sure the information is definitely sound. I disagree on 2 points with what the Charizard Lounge have done. Firstly, they've listed Manectric as many different decks. They've listed Manectric Fighting, separate from Manectric Eviltal, separate from Manectric Seismitoad, separate from Manectric Unspecified, separate from Manectric Water, separate from Manectric Black Kyurem. But I disagree with that. Now, my thing has always been, if the decks work in largely the same way, with largely the same kind of engine and main attackers, then I don't really like to categorize them differently. Whereas if they run differently, I do. So I count all of those Manectric decks the same. They all basically work the same. These are all Mega Manectric. Now, Manectric Seismitoad, you can take out of that maybe a little bit because it's different. But certainly all the Mega Manectric decks all basically work together. And this completely changes if you add them all up, it completely changes the top decks, which is why I think you need to. The other decks which they haven't split up, now, the other thing I must mention for this one is, I don't know, I think a lot of people are just listing decks as Aromatisse. The problem is there are 2 very different Aromatisse decks. There are the working more to just 2-hit KO and heal, straight fairy decks. And then there are the toolbox, I'm going to hit you for weakness because I'm playing Rainbow Energy, toolbox Aromatisse decks. And I think they are very different decks which run in different ways. So that one I would split up, and I'm going to downgrade Aromatisse a little bit because of it. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm basically going to give you my list of the top decks based on what I can see from this table and my own interpretation given how I'm splitting up the decks. Now, the good news is there is no real contention in what the top deck is. The top deck is Eviltal variants. Now, this includes straight Eviltal and Eviltal Garbodor and Eviltal Manectric and Eviltal with a Seismitoad in. These, if you add them all up, we're looking at over 50 first places. If you include Mega Manectric Eviltal, you're looking at 58. And a minimum of 163 top 4s. Now, this is also with about 60% of the cities reported. So the figures aren't going to be exact here, but I'm confident enough to give you my list of the best decks with the figures I've got. So although the figures aren't perfect, I'm very confident in my list. we have Yveltal. It is the top deck, and this shouldn't surprise anyone at this stage. Yveltal has Evil Ball, which you can do for as little as 2 energy. It does 20 damage plus 20 more for each damage attached to each active Pokemon. And you can add Muscle Band to that and Verbank Laser. Yveltal kills stuff quickly and efficiently. And then, of course, you've got Y Cyclone, DCE plus Dark Energy, it does 90, and it flicks a double colourless energy to the bench to start all over again. It is a powerhouse deck. You don't need much to get it working. You can put other attackers in there. It's got a really, really good non-EX attacker in regular Yveltal, which helps you to set up and can do 100 to knock out those pesky Safeguard Pokemon. It's just brutal. And you can put Garbodor in there as well to help you against things like Pyro or Bronzong, Metal decks, etc. Yveltal I've talked about many, many times before. I don't need to go too far into this. It's clearly the top deck at the moment and the deck to beat. The other one, which is a fairly clear second place, is Donphan. Now, this has gotten down as 43 wins and 144 top cuts in total. And even with 60-something% of the results, that's a big enough sample size to be sure about the results. Donphan is winning, and it's doing very, very well. The other thing which is very interesting for me is to see the percentage of wins here. So if you see 43 wins out of 144 top cuts, you're seeing just under a third. That's pretty good conversion rate. Similarly with the Yveltal, 52 out of 163, you're again seeing just under a third. That's a pretty good conversion rate. Whereas something like Virizion Genesect is running 25%, Seismitoad is running, well under 25%. Aromatisse is running down at about 20%, and, so you go down. So, why is Donphan good? Well, immediately, you've got the obvious Donphan, Strong Energy, Muscle Band, Fighting Stadium. It attacks for 1 energy. It's a non-EX. It's got 130 HP, so it's hard to KO. It goes to the bench, so you need to really bring it active to try and kill it. These are all good reasons. There are 2 other reasons why Donphan is so good. Number 1 is Robo Substitute. Your opponent doesn't really get any further by killing it. They don't get a prize. They don't get any further to winning. They essentially waste an attack, so you can then go and kill them with your Donphan. And of course, you've got Horlicher, which does 60 damage for 1 fighting energy, 2 an EX. And then, of course, you can start building in your Strong Energy and your Muscle Band or Silver Bangle and your Fighting Stadium, etc. It's very efficient. It runs entirely off non-EX attackers. You can make them waste attacks with Robo Substitute. And it attacks essentially with a basic Aura Stage 1 with 1 energy, meaning it doesn't take a huge amount of setup. And you can tailor it. You can put Trevenant up there. You can put your Safeguard Pokemon up there. You can put your Outrage Pokemon up there. The Safeguards, by the way, we're talking Suicune and Sigilyph that can't be attacked by EXs. And the Outrages, we're talking about the Dragon, Zekrom, Reshiram and Kyurem, which absorb damage and for a double colourless energy do 20 damage plus the amount of damage on them back to the defending Pokemon. Not to mention, of course, that you've also got Wreck, which allows you to essentially one-hit KO EXs if you get 4 energy on a Donphan. Much harder to do nowadays in the age of Enhanced Hammer, but still very, very possible. And we saw this with Donphan being the number 1 seed at the ECC this weekend after 13 rounds. Quite frankly, it's an awesome deck. And we have a clear 1-2. Now, this is where we get just a little bit fuzzy. If you go by the table I'm using, Virizion Genesect has 23 wins, 88 top cuts, and Seismitoad has 21 wins and 77 top cuts. But this is if you take all the Manectric decks as separate decks. If you add up all the Manectric decks, then you end up with about 25 wins and closer to 100 top cuts in total. And this is why I think that actually Manectric is the number 3 deck here. Now, it is very, very close. There is a clear top 5. The clear top 5 decks are Yveltal. The clear top 2 are Yveltal 1, Donphan 2. The next 3 are Manectric decks, Virizion Genesect and Seismitoad. And you could really make an argument for any of them. Virizion Genesect and Seismitoad are so close in terms of wins and top cuts that in reality, you could easily make an argument here that if we'd have had another, 50 tournaments reported that they could switch around. We've only seen 60% of the tournaments, and when you got 2 wins between them, it's entirely possible that more data would switch them around. So I don't think you can say that the 2 extra wins makes Virizion the better deck. We don't have all the data like we do for regionals. But similarly, Mega Man Electric, yes, you can split it up into many different decks, but actually, if you take Mega Man Electric all as one deck, it jumps into third. I don't necessarily think we should do that. I think what we should say instead is that 3 to 5 is, in no particular order, Mega Man Electric decks, Virizion Genesect decks, and Seismitoad decks. And I think that's the fair way to go about it. And I think they're really the top 5 decks. Now, Virizion Genesect, we've seen this time and again, and there's other things you can pair it with. Some people play it with Mega Man Electric to get your Virizion going again. Some people go ahead and, play it with a heavy enhanced hammer line or with drift blims or whatever. But it's the same deck it's always been. It's incredibly consistent. It one-hit KOs EXs with G-Booster, and we have lists that we know are good. Seismitoad, again, the majority of these are played with Garbodor. We talked about this with length with Luke Kirkham at the beginning of the podcast, so we're not going to go into too much detail here. But what I am going to say is that it blocks trainers, it abuses Verbank and Laser, and you can play it with Garbodor to really screw your opponent. You can also essentially add in whatever Pokemon you like, although Mewtwo and Manectric seem pretty good candidates. The other thing that I've been experimenting with lately is the fact that you can essentially put whatever energy you like with it. I've personally been playing Seismitoad with Malamar and Dark Energy. Malamar does 60 damage times the amount of heads you can hit for all the energy attached to him, i.e. free energy, flip free coin, 60 times the number of heads, and he's got a brilliant ability where you attach an energy to Malamar, and your opponent automatically goes to sleep. And I've been having some fun playing around with Seismitoad Malamar. But you can play it with any real number of Pokemon. And then when it comes to Manectric, we talked about these on a recent podcast. It's really good against Yveltal, which, as we've seen, is the clear-cut top deck in the format. I don't think that's in dispute at this stage. Not to mention the fact that he is himself quite an efficient attacker, and Mega Manectric does 110 damage for only 2 energy and attaches 2 basic energy to your bench. And this allows you to build up Pokemon like Black Kyurem EX or Landorus for big attacks later on in the game, because you only need a couple of lightning energy to use Mega Manectric. You can put whatever other energy you like in there as well, and this really does help to build up very, very quickly into a very, very viable deck. The thing, and I think this is allowing Mega Manectric to slide under the radar a little bit. So many people are doing well with so many different builds of Mega Manectric that people are sleeping on Mega Manectric as a top deck, and I think that's a mistake. I don't believe that it deserves to be, if we look at the table here, it's taking slots 7, 8, 11, 12 and 14 in various guises. And I don't think that's right. I think we need to put them all as one particular deck, and then it becomes one of the top decks. And if you look at, and I know regionals start this weekend, so consider this my regionals preview. These are the 5 decks you should really be considering. By the way, the big downside of Mega Manectric, of course, is its weakness to fighting, and there is quite a lot of fighting out at the moment, not least of all Donphan. You should be expecting an awful lot of Yveltal, Donphan, Virizion Genesect, Seismitoad, and Mega Manectric decks. They are, I would say, judging on all the data, and I'm not, when I give these rundowns of the top decks, although I like to put a little bit of feeling in there as well, I like to work on the data and the analysis. I like to tell you what I'm seeing based on what we've got. So, quite frankly, I think this is where we are. Now, there are some other decks which are worth mentioning, but, really, there aren't that many. The other 2 decks which are relevant are Aromatisse and Bronzong. They don't have enough wins for me to really make them relevant, and like I've said, Aromatisse, really, it comes down to, are you playing it straight fairy or are you playing it as a toolbox? Certainly, Emmanuel getting second at the ECC has shown the viability of a straight fairy deck, but remember that needed the hard charm jamming net combo to really make it relevant. So, I think Aromatisse and Bronzong are decks to watch. I don't think they're huge threats yet. By the end of this lot of regionals, maybe we'll think very differently. But like I say, let's see if we get some data to back this up first of all. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is Bronzong, which I'm just underwhelmed. It's weak to Garbodor, it has no real answer against Pyro or other fire decks. It can be slow. I just don't like it at all, to be honest. And other decks are not really worth bothering with. Flareon, sorry, has got a few wins, which is kind of cool, but not really relevant. Pyro's got a bunch of wins, but only 5, and it's not that relevant. Night March has taken down a bunch of cities, but only 4, reported. A Crobat fighting 1, a Mewtwo Crobat 1, a Dark Dusknoir 1, an Executor 1. They're really not, when you have this many city championships, you're going to get some weird decks winning, but they could be small cities, they could be very specific known metagames that can be taken advantage of by a particular deck. It's not like regionals where we can really start picking apart going, okay, it's 1, 2 of the 4 regionals, now it's worth it. I really think this is, one of those, you have to be careful with city championship results, and really you have to be really clear that a deck is good by looking at the data and seeing that it's actually won quite a few tournaments. So, quite frankly, that is my rundown of the ECC Top 4 and City Championships, and hopefully, by going through that, I've given you some things to think about for regionals this weekend. Now, it's going up on Tuesday, which is nice and early. A lot of time to think before regionals. As always, tweet me at the Wassy, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk. I am very interested to see how my listeners do. Go and rep PTCG Radio at their regionals. And get in touch with me. Let me know how you get on. I'm very excited to see how all of you guys do. And if you want to tell some people you meet about the podcast, help to spread the word, I'm not going to be offended. In fact, I might even be rather grateful about that. Good luck to all my American and Canadian friends who are going out to regionals this weekend. I am cheering for you above anybody else at those tournaments. So like I say, good luck. Let me know how you did. And if you want to spread the word, I would not mind that at all. As always, thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.